leg. I make a good woman feel. I make an old woman blush. And I make a young girl squeal. I wanna be yours, pretty baby. Yours and yours alone. I'm here to tell you, honey, that I'm bad to the bone. Bad. Bad to the bone.
Future Pros Minis. Yeah, that's where most of the pros get their start, on 50s, 60s, and 80s. So do the mini riders need to do everything like the pros? Well, they need to do as many things as they can with the bike they are riding. And because the 50s and 60s don't have the best suspension and power, some things are more important. You know, there are all levels of mini riders, from juniors or beginners to seniors or super minis. And even the fastest riders don't do everything they should do. No matter how far ahead they are or how many times they win, there are still a lot of things they need to learn to go as fast as the pros. Every little thing makes the difference in ease and in speed. I guess the best place to start would be to make sure that your motorcycle is set up right. First, the bars. Most mini riders run their bars right at about 28 to 29.5 inches. Be sure if you buy aftermarket bars that you cut them to the proper length if necessary. Don't roll the bars back too far. By that I mean when you stand at the front of the bike, look at the ends and be sure that they don't drop down. If the rider is big on the bike, roll him as far forward as he feels comfortable. Even if the ends go up a little, I said a little. If the rider is a bit small, you may want to roll the bars back, but don't drop the ends too much. You may want a lower pair of bars if the rider is small. By the way, when you set your bars, be sure to see how they feel when you are standing and when you are sitting. And when sitting, set all the way to the front of the seat where you will sit when you are cornering. Now let's look at the levers. The clutch lever and front brake should be set at about a 30-degree angle so that they are easy to use when you are standing or sitting with little or no bend in your wrists. Next, the shift lever. The shift lever should be level with the foot pegs so that it's easy to get to for the upshift and for the downshift. The brake, on the other hand, should be higher than the foot peg. Adjust it so that the finish of the braking is level with the peg. If you look at it when you are standing entering a turn and you're in your aggressive and attack position, you should be with your head forward and your butt slightly to the rear, and that brings your toes up a little, right where the brake should be. When under braking in the ruts or landing from a jump and you need to brake, you can still use the lever with no problem, with less chance of getting your toes ripped off the pegs. Suspension can be a bit of a problem on the 50s and 60s because there is little or no adjustment on the front or rear end. Most of the front fork control is done with heavier or lighter oil to make the forks faster or slower. and sometimes you can change the fork springs. Most important, watch that the forks aren't too fast on the rebound. If there is no rebound control, it will bounce him all over the racetrack. As far as the rear end goes, about the only thing that you can do is set the shock preload on the spring. Or you can send it off to someone that can rebuild the forks and shocks. You may need to replace it with a better one. If you do get the suspension redone, send it to someone like Pro Circuit that knows how to give you the best setup. On the other hand, most of the 80s have a bit more adjustment, mostly on the rear end. On the top of the shock, there is a compression adjustment that will help you with the large bumps to keep it from bottoming. On the bottom, there is a rebound control so that you can adjust how fast or how slow the rear end returns after a bump. This needs to be set for each track. For the small bumps, the rebound should be a little faster, and for the large bumps, the rebound should be a little slower. Spring preload needs to be set for each rider. On most 80s, 85 millimeters is a good starting point. However, it would be best if you check your owner's manual just to be sure. To check the sag, put the bike on a stand so that the rear wheel can drop all the way down and measure from the seat bolt to the rear axle. Make a note of the measurement. Then have the rider set on the bike and measure again, and do whatever you need to do to make more or less spring tension. Again, about the only way to make change in the front forks is to change the oil or the springs, unless you want to send them off to someone to get them reworked. Here's something you may want to try. If you want the bike to corner a little bit tighter, slide the forks up in the clamps. Or if you have a smaller rider and you want to make the bike lower, slide the forks up until the wheel almost hits the front fender. Then put as much sag in the rear shock as possible. This will make it easier for the rider to touch the ground and give him a little more confidence. Tires, check the air pressure regular and keep it around 12 to 14 pounds. The harder the track surface, the more air, so there is less chance of a tire puncture. If you go over 15 pounds, the tire won't work as it should. Also, if you keep good sharp knobs on your tires, you're going to get a lot more traction and stability. One more thing before we look at some of the riders and their problems: the clutch. The clutch is a very important part of making power when you want it and controlling the power. So if you have a clutch, be sure it works as easy as possible so that the little guys and gals can pull it in. Keep the cable lubed and put grease on all the pivot points, mostly where the cables go into the levers on both ends. You should also watch the amount of play in the clutch lever. If the rider has small hands and can't reach it, then he is not going to use it. So adjust it with enough free play so that he can reach the lever. If it's a new rider, here's some simple little tips. Always stay in a flat, open area until you have complete control over stopping, starting, and throttle control. Turning is the next thing that you should work on. Just make turns to the right and then to the left. And as soon as you feel comfortable with your turns, start to make smaller circles. Keep this up until you can make the smallest circles the bike will make. No matter what level of rider, from beginning to pro, a good riding position on the bike is very important. In fact, it may be more important to the beginner because the right position on the bike will give you more control. And control is the most important thing, no matter what speed you go. The first thing a new rider should learn is how to stop and start smooth with control. Of course, if it's an automatic, there's not that much of a problem, but it is still a problem. Don't just put someone on a bike and let them go out and ride around. They need to learn brake control. You never know when you will need to stop and how fast you will need to stop. Riders always need to learn throttle control. Once they have the stopping and starting under control, learn how the power comes on. Even small bikes go quick when you twist the throttle. Turn the throttle on and off while riding. See how fast it goes, how fast it responds, in case you happen to hit the throttle quick. And this way, you won't panic if it does happen. Lofting or wheelies. Most riders never learn to do a wheelie, or just loft the front wheel. If you don't have a clutch, you can still loft the front end. If you're standing, simply stay over the front end so that you can compress the forks a little. Then use the rebound to help pick up the front wheel. As the forks rebound, give a pull on the bars. If you have tried to do a wheelie on a bicycle, that's what you want to do, only give it a little power at the same time. Start with a little loft, then keep working on getting it higher and higher. Next, try to do your loft sitting. This will be almost impossible if you don't have a clutch. Here's what you can do so that you can loft and wheelie. Sit in the middle of the seat. Ride along slowly. Pull in the clutch. Push on the rear brake, slowing the bike and compressing the forks. At the same time, your weight should go forward. Then give the bars a yank as you let out the clutch and give it a little bit of power. Don't let the clutch out too fast. You don't want to spin the tire or get so much power that you go over backwards. Always look for traction. Leave your foot on top of the rear brake just in case the front comes up too high. But don't worry, if you can't do a wheelie, just work on the small loft. The most important thing you are going to learn is the clutch and throttle control. Don't do a horsepower wheelie. If you have to go faster and faster to keep the front end up, you're doing a speed wheelie. You want to learn to do a slow wheelie with balance and control. This is not easy to learn. There's a lot of really good riders that can't do wheelies. Just keep working at it until you get it. Then you'll be the baddest kid on the block, or should I say the baddest kid on the track. Well, let's talk about the most important part of the race, and that's the start. No matter what class you are riding or what level of rider that you are, the start is very important. The closer you are to the front of the pack out of the first turn, the easier your job is going to be. If you have 30 riders on the start gate, this will be the only time that you can pass 29 riders in about 3 seconds. Plus, if you're out front, you don't need to worry about all the other riders and who's going to run into who. The guy out front can also run at his pace. Go as fast as he wants. If you have riders in front of you, you can't always go your speed. You won't because they are holding you up. Or you need to take a longer line to try to get around them. The start is about 70% of the race on any race day. The bigger the race, the more important the start. And the worse the race conditions, the more important the start is. No matter what size bike you ride, the start is the same as far as watching the gate goes. First, know the procedure, the sign, how long they are going to hold it, and how soon they will drop the gate once the board gets turned sideways. Then, look at the pin that holds the gate up, not the gate itself. If you can see the person that's tripping the gate, watch the handle that he trips. The pin must move before the gate can fall, and if you're about 8 to 10 inches behind it, you are not going to run into it when the gate falls. If you watch the gate, you're going to be late. If you're riding an automatic, be sure that someone holds up the rear end, turns the throttle wide open, and cleans the bike out before the start of the race. Just before the gate drops, hold the front brake, open the throttle a little, and now you're ready to go when the gate falls. And don't forget to let go of the front brake as you take off. Now for the 60s and 80s. Everything here is the same as on the 125s or 250s. So get it right now with the small bikes, and you can start on anything. First, Be sure your bike is running clean. Open the throttle a couple of times, just to be sure that it's not loaded up. Again, you should know how the start will work and watch the gate pin closely. When there is about 3 to 5 seconds left before the gate drops, hold the front brake. This is best done with one finger. And let out the clutch to the point that the bike almost wants to go. You should feel the front forks compress and the rear end lift slightly. RPMs should be high, almost full throttle. Don't play with the throttle turning it on and off. Hold it steady. Now comes the hard part. When the gate starts to fall, feed the clutch out. Don't let it out too fast. If you do, it may wheelie or spin the tire. You can also let it out too slow and everyone will get the jump. Practice, practice, practice. Learning the right feed and having a quick reaction is what you need to work on. Setting on the bike right and going with it is also very important. So let's take a look at what to do. You can put one or both feet down. However, I recommend both feet so that the bike starts out of the gate straight and it doesn't lean to one side or the other. This will give you more traction and more control off the line. Plus, most all top riders start this way. Yes, I do realize that some riders are too short and the problem is that they can't get both feet down. So do the best you can with this one. Next, stay forward. Get up on the front of the seat and keep a small grip with your knees. This way, when the bike takes off, you will go with it. Lean forward a little with your head over the bars and your arms up and out. This will put more weight on the front so that there is less chance of a wheelie. Put your feet in front of the foot pegs and not behind. No, you are not going to run over your legs because as you release the clutch, you should pick up your feet. If you are starting in first gear, you may need to start with your left foot up so that you can catch the next shift quickly. Or if you start with both feet down, you can shift with the back of your boot. Yes, I said with the back of your boot. This will definitely take a little practice to get used to. This way you can shift as quick as you can, at least as quick as you can pick up your foot. Of course, if you use second gear, there should be no problem getting to the next gear. Practice to see what works the best for you. The clutch should be at that point where the bike is ready to go. Don't use more than 2 fingers on the clutch. The more you use the whole hand on the lever, the quicker you will release it. This release needs to be quick but smooth. It's a feed, not a snap. And don't forget to let go of the front brake as the clutch is released. Once again, the start is very important, so keep practicing until you get it right. Where do I line up? Most of the time, it's best to line up on the inside. This way, if you get a good start, you have the whole shot. And if you come off the line so-so, well, just charge a little harder into the turn, and you'll still come out pretty good. If you get a bad start, at least you won't get pushed out and run over. And hopefully, everyone will go a little wide. Look for the shortest distance to the first turn, and you'll have control if everyone comes off the gate the same. The outside can work if it's a wide first turn. You can sweep around the riders jamming up on the inside. Or if you just don't like going into that first turn with all the other riders, then use the outside. But it's not the best place to be most of the time. One more thing on starts. Most riders don't have the start gate for practicing. Don't worry, you don't need it. Here's one better. Everyone has someone that they ride with. Both riders pull up to the start area, with the rider on the left will be watching the rider on the right, and he'll be watching his clutch lever. The rider on the right should see if the other guy is ready. Then give him 2 to 5 seconds before the start. When you're ready, go. The guy on the left reacts to the release of the other rider. If you stay within a bike length, that's good. If you stay with him or beat him, that's super. Then switch. It can even be the same if you've got an 80 and a 250. The race is only the first 5 bike lengths. You're just looking for reaction and traction. Well, what about body position? A good body position and placement on the bike is very important if you want the best control and to be able to handle the problems when they arise. Body position should look something like this: slightly rounded shoulders, arms out, away from your body, and your legs slightly bent. Your head should be forward over the bars about 90% of the time. This way you will have complete control of the front end at all times. Stay in the middle of the bike as much as possible. The more you are in the middle, the less work you will do to get the job done. For example, here's 2 riders doing the same section. One rider makes it look easy, while the other rider makes a lot of work out of it. Here's another example. One rider is working hard, and the other rider again makes it look easy. It's all about going with the motorcycle. Most of you ride a bicycle. Well, do the same thing on the motorcycle you do with your bicycle. If you want to do a wheelie on a bicycle, you don't get on the back of the bike. You stay over the front end so that you can lift or pull on the bars to help get the front end up. Well, do the same thing on the motorcycle. Stay forward. If you're standing, it's easy to do that. However, if you're sitting, it's a little harder to compress the front end. And the front end is a little heavier on the motorcycle. So start forward and move back a little as you yank on the bars. If you are jumping a bicycle again, you don't get way back on the bicycle. You stay more in the middle and pull a little on the bars, so the front end can also get light. On a motorcycle, you can still stay in the middle, only you don't need to pull on the bars. As you go up the ramp, you will power, and this will make the front end light. The more power you give it, the lighter the front end will be. So this way you can stay more forward and have more control at all times. Every jump is a little different. The steeper the face of the jump, the more you will go back a little. If the face is too steep and you stay forward, the rear end is going to get light and possibly kick up on you really bad. But we'll talk more about this when we get to jumping. Cornering is the same. Stay in the middle. Go with the motorcycle. Don't let yourself get pulled back when you hit the power. Keep moving forward with your upper body over the bars and control the traction with the clutch. Don't slide on the back of the seat for traction. Learn to control the power. As the track gets rougher coming out of the turn and the back end starts hopping and swapping, move your butt back a little bit to stabilize the rear end. This will make it track better. But don't let your head get away from the bars and lose control of the front end. Whoops. Too many riders think that the way to go through the whoops is to hang off the back. Well, that'll keep the front end light if you keep the power on. But the problem, if you don't keep the power on all the way through, the front end is going to drop. Here's the problem. If you are on the rear, when you set the front end down, you will have little or no control over the front of the motorcycle. Having control over the front end is the most important thing. By the way, you can pick the front end up easier from the front than you can from the rear. From the front over the bars, you can pick it up with no power using the rebound of the forks. Body position, stay forward. Go with the bike and create forward momentum. If you let yourself go to the rear when you power, you will then need to pull yourself forward. This means you're pulling on the bars, pulling yourself forward, pulling the bike backwards and slowing forward momentum. So if you want to have more control and go faster, stay forward, head over the bars, arms out away from your body, and ride on the balls of your feet. Oh yes, riding on the balls of your feet is very important. Most riders ride in their arches because it's easier to shift and brake. First, let's start with the peewees. They should stay on the balls of their feet all of the time. They don't need to shift, and they also have handbrakes. So why is being on the balls of the feet so important? If you were to jump in the air, you would not land flat-footed in your arches. You would land on the balls of your feet to soften the landing. When you jump a motorcycle or a bicycle, if you're on the balls, you will take some of the impact away, giving you a softer landing at all times. Peewees have no suspension. Well, not much. So if you're on the balls, it's a lot better. No matter what bike you are riding, stay on the balls of your feet as much as possible. Of course, there is a problem being on the balls of your feet. The problem when you need to shift or brake. But it's not really a problem. No, it's just something you've never done before, so you need to practice it. If it's shifting or braking, move your foot to do that, then go back to the ball of your foot. This will also make you lighter on the pegs, and you will be more defensive because you are moving at all times. And not just standing on the pegs like you are dead. Think of it this way. A tennis player never stands flat-footed or in one spot. He stays on the balls of his feet and keeps some movement going. Same with a boxer, a basketball player, anyone that needs to be defensive stays on the balls of their feet. Races are won and lost in the corners. The speed you have in the turn says how fast you can go down the next straight. How well you do the turn determines whether you can do that double just out of the corner. Anyone can hold the throttle wide open on a straight. But no matter how fast you want to go in the turn, if you don't have the right technique and confidence, you're not going to do it as fast as you need to or as smooth as you would like. So let's look at the things that you need to do to make your corners as easy as possible. As every place on the track, body position is very important, and so it is in the turns. When you set for the turn, sit forward on the seat, as close to the gas cap as possible and not on the back of the seat. The more you are forward, the more weight is put on the front of the bike. Putting weight on the front wheel so that it will stick better and not wash out. Some riders set too far back, and this puts weight on the rear, which gives you traction on the rear, but it makes the front end so light you can't control where the bike is going. And most of the time, you will overshoot the turn. Not only should you stay forward to weight the front wheel for better traction, but you need your head forward and your outside arm up and out away from your body. If you're not forward, this is impossible to do. The next thing to think about is keeping your inside leg up so it will not make contact with the ground. And your outside leg should be gripping the tank. One, this will help to lay the bike over in the turn, keeping pressure against the tank. This will also keep you with the bike should your foot make contact with the ground. Not only should you grip in the turns, but if you keep a grip on the bike at all times when riding, you will find it easier to go with the bike when you give it power. One of the biggest mistakes made in all turns is that the rider leans the wrong way with his upper body. This is why so many riders go wide in flat turns and over the tops of berms and rutted turns. Keep your head and shoulders lean to the inside of the turn. This will help keep you and the bike going to the inside of the turn. Well, first let's talk about the flat turns. As in all turns, keep your weight forward. outside arm up and out away from your body. Weight the outside foot peg and your upper body leans to the inside. Your lower body will be on the outside edge of the seat. As you lay the bike over, you should weight the outside of the bike. The more you lay it over, the more you will set on the outside of the seat. This will help you get more traction to the rear end. However, if you also weight the outside handlebar more, you will get more traction on the front wheel. As you lay the bike over, adjust your hand on the handlebar the same way you adjust yourself on the seat. The clutch is a very important part of all turns. How you use the clutch in the corner is just as important as how you use the clutch on the start. Coming out smooth and fast is what's important. And the way you do that is to use the clutch and use it the right way. If you don't use the clutch, you're probably using too low of gear in the turn. This way it will come out fast, but it will be lacking on speed. If you are in too tall of gear, the bike will come out slow. By using the clutch, you can control the power and the traction. Think of the corner as the start. When you power, feed the clutch out. Don't slip it out and don't snap it out. Feed it smooth. A good rule to feeding the clutch out is to feed it about 1.5 bike lengths per gear. If you're in second gear, feed it 3 bike lengths. Learn to use the clutch right, and you can use a higher gear in most turns so that you can go faster through it. When it comes to a berm turn, most of the things are the same as far as the outside leg gripping the tank. Inside leg needs to be a little bit higher though, because normally you would lay the bike over a little bit further in a berm turn. Your upper body, well, it should lean to the inside, that's head and shoulders. The biggest difference is that your lower body will lean with the bike and not on the outside edge of the seat. As you make impact with the berm, the bike wants to go over it or straight ahead, so you need to lean to the inside. Lay the bike over and it will go where you want it to go. Earlier in this video, I talked about riding on the balls of the feet. Well, this is just as important in the turn as it is everywhere else on the racetrack. The more you can use the balls of your feet, the more pressure you put on the outside peg, and the easier it is to stand up when you're coming out of the turn. Rutted turns are a lot like berm turns as far as what to do with your body, upper and lower. The biggest difference is that you now have a much smaller area to work with. If you want things to go perfectly, you need to be more perfect. In most rutted turns, you only have 4 or 5 inches to work with. If you are too low on the wall, you are going to drag your front wheel on the inside of the wall, and this will make the front wheel cut to the inside, making the front end turn under. If you don't have the power on, you will feel like you are going to fall, or you may even go down. This will also make you dab your foot, messing up your timing and slowing your drive through the turn. On the other hand, you need to make sure that you're not too high on the wall, or you're going to go over the top. Look at the wall and stay on it with a smooth power. Don't explode the power in the turn. If you explode the power, the bike will stand up quickly, causing it to go wide. Pay close attention to what gear you are in. If you are in too low of a gear, you are limited to how fast you can go through the corner. If you need to shift before you exit the corner, you probably started in too low of a gear. Another thing you should be aware of is don't lock up the rear wheel going into the turn. You shouldn't pull the clutch in going into the turn because it will make the bike freewheel and pick up speed. With the clutch in, it is easier to lock up the rear wheel. With the clutch in, it's hard to feel what the rear is doing until it locks up. With the clutch out, you know how hard you are pushing on the brake because you can hear what the motor is doing. And if you push it on hard, it will stall. The other problem is, if you slide the rear wheel into a rutted turn, the front wheel will be in the rut and the rear end will go over. Then you're going to have one in and one out, and now it's impossible to lay the bike over without losing the rear end. Your fingers should be on the lever going into the turn so that if something goes wrong, you can fix it quickly. But you're not going to do much with it on the inserts. Once you get into the turn, pull the lever a little and then start to feed it so that you get max power and control. Rutted turns are not easy, so the more you practice them, the better you will be. The next is an off-camber turn. This one can be very difficult. The problem? Which way do you lean? Where do you put your body? How do you get traction? Well, as far as where you sit, it's the same as in the other turns, forward. Now comes the tricky part. Your lower body is a little on the outside of the seat, just like in a flat turn. But your upper body leans to the inside, more like in a berm turn. And of course, head and shoulders lean just like in all of the other turns. Be sure you keep your weight forward and your outside arm up and out so that you can make the bike go where you want it to go. Next comes traction. Never make a radical or quick power change on an off camber. If you do, you're going to lose traction and there is a good chance that you can go down. Roll the throttle on and feed the clutch out so that you make traction even when there is none. On an off camber, you need to work the front wheel a little, cutting it uphill. If you don't, your bike will go down to the outside. Stay loose. Work the front end up the off camber. Weight the front end, outside arm up, feed the power, head and shoulders to the inside, and weight the outside peg. Most riders hate off cambers and can't ride them because they don't know how. But they're not that tough, and you can gain a lot of time on the other riders if you work on it. Practice and more practice. Okay, so I talked about the clutch. Clutch. Why is it so important? Because it makes you go faster and it gives you more control. Simply, if you don't use it right, you're going to lose. How important is it? Well, if you can find a copy of Dirt Bike February 95, there's an article, 125 Pro Riding Tips. Now remember, a 125 is no different than riding a 60 or an 80 or even a 50 if you had a clutch on it. Let's start with page 20. There is a picture of Doug Henry. First, you should take note of his finger on the clutch. Next, on page 21, Eric Kehoe has a finger on the clutch lever, and so does Bobby Moore. As you look at page 22, Ryan Hughes also has his finger on the clutch lever. Something else I would like to mention here is that 2 of the riders are jumping and 2 are cornering. The clutch is necessary everywhere. Then on page 23, there are 3 riders. The only one we can see the clutch lever is Mike Kudrowski, and again you see that his finger is on the lever. Then as we look at Mickey Diamond on page 24, the same thing. One finger again on the lever. Then on page 25 you see 4 riders. Guy Cooper, Johnny O'Mara, Mike LaRocco, and Jeremy McGrath. 3 of the riders have their finger on the lever. The other you can't see because of the hand guards. But I know the Osho style, and trust me, his finger is there on the lever. As we read what each rider has to say about going fast, they don't all talk about the clutch. But it's obvious how important it is when you see the finger on the lever. So does this mean that you can't go fast without the clutch? No, You can go fast without using the clutch, but you can go faster with it. Sure, look at Ricky Carmichael. Here's a kid that flies on an 80, maybe the fastest 80 rider in the world right now. But if you look closely, he doesn't use his clutch much at all. He relies on his other talents to go fast. But how fast could he be if he knew the importance of the clutch and what it's all about? Why not start out the right way? Learn to use all the right techniques from the beginning, and you won't need to play catch-up later. 60s, 80s, 125s, 250s, it's all the same. If you want to go stronger and have more control of the power, do it with the clutch. Now let's look at jumping. There are a lot of different types of jumps on the track. But no matter what kind it is, a good body position and good technique is very important. So let's start with a simple ramp jump. If the front end keeps dropping and you land on the front wheel, it's because you aren't giving it enough power as you go off the jump. Here's what happens on the face of all jumps. As the bike goes into the face or on the takeoff ramp, both suspensions compress. Then, as the front wheel gets to the top and the forks start to extend, if you don't have enough power at this point, the front wheel will drop over the crest. If you are on the power, it will put the front end up into the air. Now, as the rear wheel crests the peak, if the power was off and the front end dropped a little, when the rear end rebounds off the top, it will kick the back end up, putting you in a nosedive. However, if the power is on launching the front end up, as the rear goes over the crest, it will shoot the bike up and out, not letting the front end drop like a rock. The steeper the takeoff ramp, the more power you will need to keep the front end light and in the air. There are two ways to make power, with the clutch and throttle, or just with the throttle. If you use the clutch and throttle together, you can make a stronger, more controlled power. You can get that bark really easy. If you only use the throttle, you will need to twist it a lot harder to get the same kind of power, plus you will build a lot more speed. Sometimes you don't have enough speed going up the jump to clear it, if it's a double or a tabletop. But with a little help from the clutch, you will have the power that you need. If the jump has a kicker at the top, it will tend to throw the front end down even more, mostly because it compresses the rear end, giving you more rebound and kicking the rear end up. In this case, you need to give it more power going up the ramp so that the front wheel won't drop at the top. And most of that should happen right at the kicker on the top of the jump. When in doubt, gas it. Put the power to the rear wheel. As far as your body position goes, it should be mostly forward over the jump. The more aggressive you are, the more you can be forward. The more you are forward, the more aggressive you can be. As you approach the jump, your head should be forward over the bars, arms out, knees slightly bent, and a finger on the clutch lever. Compress as you go into the face of the jump. Be sure to power up the ramp. Then, as you leave the jump, rebound with the suspension. If it is a ramp jump, you won't need to worry about the front end being too high if you're in a neutral position on the bike. However, if the jump has a steep takeoff ramp, you may find the front end to be too high. If so, as you leave the ramp, stay light on the foot pegs, allowing the rear end to come up a little so that the bike will flatten out at the arc of the flight. By the way, the best way to control the bike in the air and to be sure you have the right bike angle for the best landing is to be sure that the bike is always flat at the arc of the jump. No matter what the jump is, a double, a ramp jump, a tabletop, a downhill, or an uphill, the bike will be flat at the arc. That's the highest point of the jump. If you are going to land more on the flat, Stop the bike when it is flat so that it won't land too much on the front wheel. However, if it's a double or a tabletop, you are going to land more on the downside. You will want to land more nose down then. So, as you leave the ramp, stay neutral. Grip the bike with your legs and lift a little with your feet on the rear end when it rebounds. Just like lifting the rear end of a bicycle if you are going to bunny hop it or pick the back end up. Get light on the pegs and weight on the bars. This will keep the front end down and let the rear end lift. No matter what kind of a jump it is, always power on the landing for the softest landing. Again, don't just turn the throttle open. Use the clutch and throttle together so that you will have the strongest and most controlled power and the fastest getaway. Feed the clutch as you land, just like on the start. And do it just as the wheel starts to make contact with the ground. Not before and not after, just as you land. Timing is a very important part of jumping. Time where you land and how you land. Always keep your bike as low as you can and going forward, not up in the air. A lot of times riders use too low of a gear on the jumps. If you are in too low of a gear, the bike will be at high RPMs, which will compress the suspension more and give you more rebound. This can be good if it's right out of a turn and you need more lift to clear the second jump. But most of the time a higher gear is better to stay lower to the ground. Problem? You may need to use the clutch a little so that you can use a higher gear. Another problem that is in the lower gear, your front end will tend to get higher because the power is so strong when you're going up the jump. In a higher gear, the bike soaks up the jump better to help you level the bike out. Riding on the balls of the feet is also very important on the jumps. First, to soak up the impact on the takeoff and on the landing. But most important for the landing, on the balls of the feet you will land softer. Just like getting up on a chair or something and jumping off onto the ground, you are not going to land flat-footed. You're not going to land in your arches. You're going to land on the balls of your feet. Don't let the suspension do all the work. Help it. Not only being on the balls of your feet is important, but as you land, move into the bike, just like you bend your knees when you jump off of something onto the ground. If you do both of these on the landing, you will be lighter on the pegs and the suspension will love it, and so will you. By the way, don't forget the arms on the landing. Because you are moving forward, you will have your weight more on the bars. Use your arms to soak up the impact just like you do your legs. Compress and rebound. Stay light on the pegs. Stay light on the bars. Let the bike do the work and you just float on top. Whoops or rough choppy sections. Don't get on the rear of the bike in the whoops or in the rough. Sure, you have seen riders going through the whoops, hanging off the back so that the front end will stay light. But you're just asking for trouble. If the front end drops into one, or if the power is off and the front end drops, you are going to have a problem. No control. Try to keep your head over the front end as much as possible, even if your butt is back. If you are tall, you can get the best of both worlds. Head over the front end for more control, and rear to the back, gripping with your legs to stabilize the rear end. First, understand this. I always talk about keeping your head forward over the bars, but don't put your whole body forward or the rear end will be hopping around as you're going through the whoops. You need traction and control over the rear end as well. Remember, in whoops or in a rough section, you want the front end as light as possible so that it will stay out of the bottom of the holes. In order to do that, you need to do a small wheelie. To do a wheelie, you need traction, and the best way to get traction is to have some weight to the rear wheel. The problem, most riders put all the weight to the rear, moving back to the rear fender. Then, if the front drops, again, no control. Stay more in the center with your butt back a little. Remember how you do a wheelie on a bicycle? You don't hang off the back. In fact, if you are way on the back, you can't lift the front wheel. It's easier to lift the front end if you're on top than if you're hanging off the rear. Compress the forks, use the rebound and the power, and pick up the front end. There are a lot of different types of whoops. First, the high speed, get to the top and skip across, very much like a rough, choppy section. Here, you need to keep the bike as flat as possible. Front end light so that it won't fall into the bottoms. If you get the front end too high, it will pull the rear end down into the holes, and this will slow forward momentum. Let the front wheel touch the top of each whoop. This way, it will rebound the forks to the top of the next one, if the power stays on. Use your clutch a little just to be sure that you don't run out of power at any point during the whoops. And stay on the balls of your feet for the smoothest ride. Then there are the whoops that require a little timing. This one is more of a loft in and set the front wheel down in the right spot, pick it up and do it again. If this is the case, again, don't get too far back when you lift the front wheel, because if you are to the back when it drops, you are going to get pulled forward to the bars. Or you may get kicked in the butt by the rear of the seat if it kicks up. Keep your head over the bars, butt to the rear a little if you need to. Carry the front as far as you feel comfortable, over 1, 2, or 3 whoops. Then set it down just over the top of the whoop that you want, on the back side. If you set it on the top, it will bounce the front end into the face of the next one, slowing your forward momentum and messing up your timing. Then you are going to get that rocking horse ride through the rest of the whoops. If it's right, as soon as you set the wheel down over the whoop, again, power using a little clutch and throttle. Pick the front end up and do the same thing again all the way to the end. No matter what kind of whoops you are going through, stay in the middle of the bike as much as possible. Don't leave the front end and cover the rear end. Keep your arms out away from your body for best control and leverage. If you are way on the back, you cannot keep your arms out because they are too straight. You can make a lot of time on your competitors in the whoops and rough sections. Work on them and get it right. Be sure to try different lines. Too many riders use the same line through the whoops. The problem? There is no way that you can pass the rider in front of you if you are in the same line. The same goes for the rest of the track. Don't go where everyone else goes. Don't follow. If you are in the same line as the rider in front of you, you can't pass. So what's the bottom line? No matter what size bike you are riding, the techniques are the same. Even on a 50 with no clutch, you can still ride on the balls of your feet, stay forward, and you can do everything except the clutching techniques to make the kind of power that you want and when you want it. As far as 60s and 80s, do it right. Do it right now. The better you do things now, the easier it will be as you move up in bike size and classification. Get the advantage on your competition. Your gain is their loss. Some riders can talk the talk, but they can't walk the walk. So get the look and you're gonna book.
Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Who cares about the clouds if we're together?
Just sing a song and bring the sunny weather.
until